Alright, so hopefully by this time you've gotten your cable support mounted on top, which you did as part of disassembling the tool head to level the nozzles with the little C-bracket tool. And it's not shown on this video, but in a couple series of videos you'll see how to disconnect this cyclone fan and how to add on the front mounted fan. So we changed the fan setup. It's nice we don't have to wire all the way back to the controller, but having that side mounted fan, while we could make an attachment that would go blow across both nozzles evenly through some computational fluid dynamics simulation, so on and so forth, it doesn't make sense to, because we lose 3/4 of an inch to an inch of machine travel while having that fan on that side. So it actually puts the travel of the machine smaller than what's simulated on Makerware. So not very advantageous. So we're going to pull that fan off, put the other fan on. So after you've done that, you are more or less ready to print. Before you can even do that, you need to level the build plate. So a couple things when leveling the build plate. First off, you need to get everything out of inside your printer. I know we've been kind of storing stuff in there for now, so make sure the work area is clear. Then your build plate, you actually want to tighten these screws down. If you just let it start the leveling process before you tighten these screws down a considerable amount, what's going to happen is it's just going to bury the tips right into the table, because it doesn't know where the table is. You know, in theory they've ran a production test and already calibrated the machine for us, but that's something we can't guarantee. So I'd rather be safe than sorry. So it helps if you raise the bed again. Remember, use both hands, slowly lift it so you don't put too much current into the motor, into the electronic display. And you just kind of almost want to crank it until the springs are all the way compressed. Alright, now that I got the bed lowered down to its lowest position by tightening those wing nuts, more or less ready to level it out, but we still have some other things to consider. Now ideally, if you were on a printer with the glass bed, like the other Flash Forger on the moving cart, we would heat up the entire printer, the extruders and the heated build plate. But because this just has a little, almost like a plastic mouse pad type cover, it's not tape, it's not polyamide, it's like not painter's tape, not polyamide tape. It is very reminiscent of a mouse pad, that kind of almost like a waxy like feel. Some I believe would be polyethylene. This stuff will melt if the nozzles, when heated to extruding temperatures, come in contact with it. So we can't have that. So we can't heat up the nozzles during the leveling process, otherwise we'll leave little burn spots in our table, and that's not good. But we can heat the build plate, because that won't get hot enough to actually do any damage. The reason we heat this up is, like everything in the universe, as it heats up it expands, as it shrinks it contracts. So when we heat the build plate up and the nozzles, we're putting everything at its relative expansion rate. Now yes, temperatures are going to be varying depending on whether you're using ABS, PLA, nylon, so on and so forth, but in general they're up in that 200 to 230 range. And the build envelope is anywhere from 50 to 100 C. The other thing is if there's any warping, you know, as it heats up, stresses get relieved, get enforced, so you want to account for those as well. So what I'm going to do now is turn on the machine, and I'm going to heat up only the build plate. I'll show you how to do that. So reach it behind to the back, flip the switch on. It's going to play its little music, I believe. I'm going to zoom in on the controller part. If I can, there we go. Oop, too far. Alright, so now I'm going to scroll down to Utilities, hit OK in the center, scroll down again until I see Preheat Settings, hit OK. Now right now my red extruder's set to 205. It's probably because it was set for PLA last. I want to assume the worst case scenario, so I'm going to set to 235, which is the ABS temperature. Again, I'm not going to actually be heating this up, but in general, if I had a glass bed, I want to heat up the nozzles as well. So I'd set that. And then the platform, I want to be closer to 100. Again, we're kind of setting ourselves up for the worst case scenario, not so much the room temperature scenario. Alright, so set that. If I hit the back button, scroll up, or hit the back button again actually, so then scroll up, go to preheat, I can scroll down and choose whether or not I want something on or off. So we're just by hitting the OK button. So I don't want the extruder on, but I want the platform on. So go up to start preheating, and I'll start the process. And we'll wait for that to get up to temperature. Alright, the bar stopped loading, it's up to temperature. During that time you could have grabbed a piece of paper. Doesn't really need to be much more than just a slip of scrap paper. You're just looking for that 3 thou to 4 thou thickness of a piece of paper. So one thing I forgot to mention before I heated everything up, if you had already printed something, so you guys haven't printed many things yet, so your nozzle should be clean, but if you have printed something, you need to heat up that nozzle, or before you let it cool down after your last print, you need to make sure you wipe everything off and clean it off entirely. Because what will happen as the nozzle is cooling down, the filament that's still semi-liquid in it will ooze out a little bit, and it'll form a little pip, and that'll stick out compared to the other nozzles. So when you're leveling, your bed will be kind of set to a tilt, which isn't good. So you want to make sure that nozzle is completely clean. Already done that on here, so we're good to go. So to start the leveling procedure, hit back button, go down to utilities, hit OK, then scroll down until you see level build plate. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK, and before I do that I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see what it's doing. Okay, so I'm just going to hit OK on level build plate. It's going to go and home out the XY axes, and then it's going to home the Z. Now if I didn't shorten those screws down, tighten those screws down, that fan enclosure would have gotten nailed by the table. And that's not good for the machine. So right now it's plenty clear, and I want to go through the leveling process. Right now our Z table is fixed. Now watch out, it's 100 degrees Celsius. That's boiling water. You'll burn yourself if you keep your hand on it too long or touch the wrong spot. And you can kind of do the tap test, you know, what you're supposed to do whenever before you touch anything in our labs. You can sustain that for a little bit, but you don't want to put any pressure on it. So stay away from the top side. On the bottom side, should be cool for the most part. I can grab the sheet metal frame just fine. So one thing you'll notice is you really can't move the Z frame right now. Normally you can push it up or down a little bit. That servo is locked. So the only way you're going to push it up or down is if you overdrive the torque, which isn't good for the motor. So, however, the XY, if I take my lid off, the XY on the other hand can move around quite freely, and that's exactly what we want. So what we'll do is we'll come to the front here, get our piece of paper, slide it under our nozzles, and then we're going to loosen that screw. You might have a ways to go depending on what the factory settings were, but that extra cushion zone is nice because if that fan is too low, you're going to run into problems when you go to home it. So go up basically until that sheet of paper just starts to stick. So another problem with the fan. Right now it's touching the bed and my nozzles aren't. It's not a good thing. So I'm going to tighten that back down a little bit, take off that fan real quick. I think it's just a single bolt on the side. So. Alright, so basically I snapped that shroud off, so it's not an issue anymore. Again, we're taking it off anyway. So you want to go until your nozzle just straight rubbing the paper. Now, this is a hard thing to show on film because you're really just going by the feel of it. You don't want to have it so tight to the point where when you pull it out, you actually feel the nozzles drop. That's a little too tight. Or I should say the build plate kind of pop back up. So and you don't want it to be where you don't feel anything. There should be a little bit of kind of like a dragging sensation. And you can notice how the paper's kind of bending up a bit. That means I'm catching on something. So once I get it to a good height on this first screw, again, I'm best off being right above the screw I'm adjusting because I'm going to minimize any distance that I'm off. If I raise this up or down and I'll touch it off on the side, as I can feel it right now, it's actually really tight because this bed is tilted because it wasn't level. So I'm going to go to the back here, right above the back left screw, and I'm going to tighten that, loosen the nut, which will bring the bed up against the paper. Alright, starting to get that pinch again. So I'll push it over to the other side. You can watch out, this paper will start to get hot, so don't burn yourself. Get that back under the nozzles. And finally raise the last one. And that's not it. Go back and do it again. Because more likely what's happening is you raise this up and only set it off to one nozzle. Now it's going through and getting both nozzles fine-tuned. As you can see, I can't even get it under this nozzle. So on either side, it's too high. So I'm going to have to actually tighten this a bit. Pull the bed back down. The gripping sensation I'm looking for. Again, it's going to be different for everyone's feelings. As long as it's consistent between all three, according to what you feel, that'll be good enough. So now I'll go back here. Alright, at this point you should be fairly close. So after I check 3 points and it's okay, I'll kind of go through the rest of the table, make sure I'm getting the same feeling, which I am for the most part. If you're not, find out if it's your nozzles. There's a possibility it might be your bed. Another reason why we like to upgrade to the glass beds is they tend to be more flat. So everything seems good here. So once I'm done, I got on the control panel, it says press M1 level. I hit OK, and we're good to go. We're all leveled.